part of the reason that people go watch anti-heroes and villains is because there's a part of them crying out for the incorporation of the monster within them, which is what gives them strength of character and self-respect, because it's impossible to respect yourself until you grow teeth. And if you grow teeth, then you realize that you're somewhat dangerous, or maybe somewhat seriously dangerous, and then you might be more willing to demand that you treat yourself with respect and other people do the same thing. And so that doesn't mean that being cruel is better than not being cruel. What it means is that being able to be cruel and then not being cruel is better than not being able to be cruel. Because in the first case, you're nothing but weak and naive. And in the second case, you're dangerous, but you have it under control. And you know, a lot of martial arts concentrate on exactly that as part of their philosophy of training. It's like, we're not training you to fight. We're training you to be peaceful and awake and avoid fights. But if you happen to have to get in one, and I guess the philosophy also is that if you're competent at fighting, that actually decreases the probability that you're going to have to fight, because when someone pushes you, you'll be able to respond with confidence, and with any luck, and this is certainly the case with bullies, with any luck, a reasonable show of confidence, which is very much equivalent to a show of dominance, is going to be enough to make the bully back off. And so the strength that you develop in your monstrousness is actually the best guarantee of peace. And that's partly why Jung believed that it was necessary for people to integrate their shadow. And he said that was a terrible thing for people to attempt, because the human shadow, which is all those things about yourself that you don't want to realize, reaches all the way to hell. And what he meant by that was, it's through an analysis of your own shadow that you can come to understand why other people are capable, and you as well, of the sorts of terrible atrocities that characterized, let's say, the 20th century. And without that understanding, there's no possibility of bringing it under control. When you study Nazi Germany, for example, or you study the Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin, and you're asking yourself, well, what are these perpetrators like? Forget about the victims, let's talk about the perpetrators. The answer is, they're just like you. And if you don't know that, that just means that you don't know anything about people, including yourself. And then it also means that you have to discover why they're just like you. And believe me, that's no picnic. So that's enough to traumatize people, and that's partly why they don't do it. And it's also partly why the path to enlightenment and wisdom is seldom trod upon, because if it was all a matter of following your bliss and doing what made you happy, then everyone in the world would be a paragon of wisdom. But it's not that at all. It's a matter of facing the thing you least want to face. And everyone has that there's this old story in King Arthur where the knights go off to look for the Holy Grail, which is either the cup that Christ drank out of at the Last Supper, or the cup into which the blood that gushed from his side was poured when he was crucified. The stories vary, but it's basically a holy object, like the phoenix in some sense, that's a representation of transformation. So it's an ideal. And so King Arthur's knights, who sit at a round table because they're all roughly equal, go off to find the most valuable thing. And where do you look for the most valuable thing when you don't know where it is? Well, each of the knights looks at the forest surrounding the castle and enters the forest at the point that looks darkest to him. And that's a good thing to understand, because the gateway to wisdom and the gateway to the development of personality, which is exactly the same thing, is precisely through the portal that you do not want to climb through. What are you afraid of? Well, okay, you're afraid of everything. Well, let's get something specific you're afraid of. Well, I'm afraid of an elevator. Okay, an elevator. So I have a client, she's afraid of elevators. The elevator door opens, she goes, "That's a tomb." And I thought, oh, wow, I thought it was an elevator. But for you, it's not a bloody elevator. It's death. And so that's what you're afraid of. It's worse than that. You're afraid of being trapped inside there in the dark alone. alone, not knowing if anyone is going to rescue you, stuck there with your damn imagination, freaking out. It's like, and if that's not, and then maybe you have a heart attack because you're so terrified and you die. It's like, you know, so that's the elevator. Well, it's no bloody wonder no one's going to get into something like that. And then maybe underneath that is your distrust in the mechanisms of society, right? Because, you know, a normal person, those weird creatures, they'll get an elevator, what the hell, they don't care. And partly it's because they have an implicit belief, even if the thing stops, somebody will come along and rescue them. And usually you don't even think about it, right? It's like, oh, what the hell, it's an elevator. It's like, the danger is invisible to you. And it's partly because you implicitly trust the structure. And so maybe you go into the unconscious presuppositions of the person who is terrified of the elevator and the subways, and you find out they have a real problem with trusting authority. That's partly why they don't get along with their husband, and why they've never been able to stand up for themselves. So then you say, okay, well, you're afraid of the damn elevator, but it's not an elevator, it's a tomb. And the tomb is partly you, and it's partly the elevator, and partly your unconscious mind. And so, well, what can you handle? Can you go and look at an elevator from 10 feet away? It's like, yes. Okay. How about 9 feet away? Yes. 5 feet? Yes. 4 feet? No. Okay, no problem. 4.5 feet. We're going to go from that elevator. We're going to look at the damn thing until you're bored of it. Because that's what we're trying to... You should be bored of the elevator. Because then you're not afraid of it, obviously. It's like, it's an elevator. You just don't notice it, right? All these things around here that you don't notice. I'd take you out of here and ask you what color the walls are. You haven't got any idea. You know, I suspect for most of you, there's not a chance you'd be able to identify the gender of the person who's sitting next to you, unless you know them. It's like, you just don't remember anything. And why should you? Everything works. Like, you don't have to pay attention to it. So, is that staying up? Yeah, it's still up. Yeah, it's still up. Still up. I was like, really? No. No, you get bored of that real quick, and so then you just ignore it. But the agoraphobic has had that veil of ignorance torn away, and what they see behind it is mortal threat. And so that's really what you're helping them deal with. And so this week they're 4.5 feet from the elevator. Next week they're a foot from the elevator. And the week after that, the horrible gates of hell open, and they look inside, and they don't run. And so, hey, they're tougher than they thought they were. And that's what you're teaching them, actually. You're not teaching them that the world isn't dangerous. Because that's a stupid thing to teach someone. Bloody right, the world is dangerous. It's terrifying. And sometimes people they realize that. And the veil lifts. And they see horror everywhere. And then they can't move. They hide at home. They cower at home. Because everything has become a predatory domain. And so what you teach them is, you're not as much of a rabbit as you think. And part of that is that you help them grow some teeth so that they can go home and have that fight with their husband that they should have had 25 years ago. And it happens very frequently with agoraphobic clients, that you get them so they can go on the damn elevator, and they can go on the subway, and they can take a taxi. Maybe they learn to drive. Wow. They get some autonomy, and then they're a little tougher, and so then they can stand up for themselves, and they go back, and like, their husband might not be very happy with any of this. Really, it depends on what sort of guy he is. You know, if he's a real tyrant, he might be just perfectly happy that he's married to someone who, you know, is afraid of her own shadow, because then she won't ever leave. And so that's a nasty little story, and believe me, it's not uncommon. So she gets tougher by facing what she fears. And what she finds out is there's a hell of a lot more to her than she thought. And that's really what happens when you do behavior therapy with someone who's agoraphobic. It isn't really that they get less afraid, it's that they get braver. That's way different. It's because brave is alert and able to cope. Naive is there's no danger. It's like, oh yeah, right, there's no danger. Jesus, what a stupid theory that is.